Jeremy Rosenthal, legal analyst, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. This story has captured the internet's attention because, of course, so many people woke up every day, listened into Wendy Williams for her talk show that she had for several years on television. And it seems like in the last few years, she's been facing some medical issues that have caused her to be placed in a conservatorship. First of all, can you talk about what a conservatorship is and what sort of led to that path for Wendy to be taken into that?
Let's talk about that because I think that these are concepts that most people have heard. We hear of conservatorship, we hear of guardianships, and sometimes we don't exactly know what that means. These are legal proceedings that we take when we have usually maybe an elderly person, somebody with memory issues or cognitive issues that can no longer really manage their day-to-day affairs, and they may be vulnerable financially, physically, or something like that. So what parties in most states can do, and probably every state, what they can do is you can apply for some type of conservatorship or guardianship. And what that will do is that allows a judge to sort of, based on an investigation, sometimes that could be state funded, it could be a private investigation, essentially determine who needs to be making the financial decisions for somebody. And in the case of Wendy Williams, if it's determined to be severe enough, also the housing issues and day-to-day issues. And a lot of times what happens, unfortunately, we see a lot of families that have fights over who loves grandma the most, or a lot of times, of course, there's money that is sort of the underpinnings here. And in this instance, what happened was in 2022, Wells Fargo, who was the financial institution that Wendy Williams was dealing with, had a lot of concern about some bizarre either spending behavior or some bizarre behavior from Miss Williams herself. And they were concerned that family members might be taking advantage. So they alerted the authorities. And the next thing you know, we find ourselves in one of these legal proceedings where the judge is hearing about mental evaluations, medical evaluations, psychological evaluations. And yes, my understanding is that she's been diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, which again, I'm a lawyer, not a medical professional, but my understanding is that's not a condition that gets better over time or heals. So if that's what a judge is looking at, you would think a guardianship or conservatorship would be appropriate.
I'm glad you mentioned that because another person that we have heard of the word conservatorship, I think we all remember the Free Britney movement and what happened there. She was under that conservatorship for several years after she had what she even called a psychotic break. And eventually she was able to be removed from it as well. And just sort of watching the video back of Wendy in her prime on the show, it seems hard to believe. And as she's now speaking out a little bit more, that this is maybe what's right for her. When we're talking about these conservatorships, is there a level that things are different in between? You said sometimes they control the money, sometimes the money and the housing. It's just interesting to see that she's been put away in this facility with what she says feels like a prison.
There's different types of guardianships. One, for instance, would be something that is temporary, right? Maybe in the case of Britney Spears, if it's mental illness, if it's some type of psychosis that can be treated, something that allows for the ward, as they are known, to essentially get better. In many instances, there are guardianships over minors or people who we know will obviously not always be minors and then will become adults and fully capable and fully functional. And then you have instances where you do have permanent injury or a permanent diagnosis. And for anybody that's watching, these are obviously Wendy Williams in her case is a severe outlier. If you know of an elderly person that is particularly isolated, or you're concerned about their well-being, or if they're not able to take care of themselves, or sometimes you might see erratic spending habits, then it may be appropriate to sort of inquire as to their well-being. Because again, the law does provide for remedies for people in this situation to where others can sort of step in and manage. again, a lot of times it's just sort of these breeding grounds for infighting amongst family members, and obviously nobody ever wants to see that. Wendy Williams, in this instance, her family kind of feels like she's been kept away. The guardian who has been appointed in this case is somebody who has, it seems, has kind of kept the family a little bit at arm's length. It's natural for the family to kind of want to struggle against that. And it's also natural for Wendy Williams herself, obviously, to disagree with what is happening to her and her treatment. That said, the filings in this case, the medical tests that the judge is looking at, are sealed. We don't know what those do. We don't know the results of those tests, and we don't know necessarily what they say. So there's a lot of things that the judge and the inner circle are really balancing here. Of course, when we see this dramatic, situation where she may be throwing a note from the window, and then she gets taken across town in an ambulance and has a test that's released publicly, it does put some pressure on the courts. And obviously, everybody wants to get this right. Nobody wants somebody who has regained capacity or who has been misdiagnosed. Nobody wants that person to be treated this way. So, I mean, we will potentially see some legal action. I don't know if we're going to see any changes here, though.
And that was what I was going to ask you because, again, Wendy said she really wants to rely on this independent, quote unquote, report that she just had after she was taken to the hospital to test her mental cognitive abilities on Monday of this week. Can she sort of submit that separately to the court? Does it require a specific filing? I know you briefly touched on that.
You absolutely can. The question is it going to carry much of any weight, and is it really comparable to some of the other testing that she has been exposed to in the past? Going through guardianship training, when you were learning to evaluate these types of situations, what you're taught to do is to ask layered questions. The test that she was given, my understanding is, what day of the week is it? Who's the president of the United States? Where do you live? What's your name? These types of questions. To really diagnose these types of situations, you need questions such as, what did you do yesterday? Talk me through what you ate for breakfast a few days ago. Talk me through, do some math issues. There's a famous test that tests for dementia, which is to have the patient draw a clock. Because people with these type of cognitive disabilities really struggle at those types of very basic things. So you can certainly submit this test to the judge, but again, I don't know that a test by a doctor like that is going to necessarily be able to counterbalance probably some pretty thorough testing, which has been done in the past and may be done in the future. And look, even if these diagnoses of her are accurate, there's always exceptions to the rule. Maybe she is in a better mental state than she was before, and who knows why that could be the case. So the court's certainly going to want to measure twice and cut once, you would think, with regards to this. So I do think the court would consider a new evaluation, but I don't know that it's going to be everything. And we also have to remember, this is the same group of lawyers, the same judges who have been evaluating over and over Miss Williams for 3 years. So nothing is really going to be completely new to them.
And Jeremy, I have to ask you again, the public is very invested in the health and well-being of Wendy Williams. Of course, I mentioned the Free Britney movement that happened as well a few years ago. Does that have any impact? Does that sort of pressure require folks to start taking a much closer look? As you said, the courts, they don't want to get this wrong. They don't want to come out on the other side blamed for anything that maybe they could have done to make sure that Wendy was in the best hands.
Mm-hmm. This is like in a criminal case, we don't want to convict somebody wrongfully. If it takes going to court 50 times to get it right in Wendy Williams' case, it's worth it. So I think any exposure that this situation has to daylight is certainly a healthy thing. Obviously, the courts and the judges and the doctors who have been treating her are the most familiar with her. So you would think that that the people sort of on the inside are going to have a little more information and knowledge than the rest of us would. But again, I don't think that this scrutiny hurts. I don't think it hurts in any way, shape, or form. And again, if it takes 50 times of going to court to get it right on somebody's liberty, it's worth it, or 100 times, or 200 times, or whatever it takes. So this obviously is a very severe case, a very serious case, and nobody anywhere wants somebody to be misdiagnosed and have their life completely taken away from them.
And of course, we know Wendy is also advocating for herself at this point. You talked about how she's done several interviews, talked on the phone to TMZ's Harvey Levin, as well as done a full interview on The Breakfast Club as well. This press tour that she has is going to continue later on this week, having this from the New York Post. She's set to appear on The View after you see they're begging for help in this case. With all of the public, again, and as she's speaking out, will this help her? Will any of this be taken into account watching and listening as Wendy advocates for herself in these very public interviews? Can that be used in court as well?
It can help her if she's able to hold herself out very well. It helps her if she's able to ask and excuse me, answer some complicated questions. It helps her if she's able to show layers of thinking and details that you would expect somebody who would be able to manage their own affairs. It could backfire very badly if she doesn't perform well, if she missteps, if she says something that is kind of like an off-key piano that everybody listening sort of painfully realizes, maybe they're right about her. And look, one of the most difficult things for somebody in her situation is to get people to believe her. It's always the alcoholic who's going to say, I don't have an alcohol problem. It's always going to be the person who, if we think that if we think that they're suffering psychosis or psychotic, well, of course they're going to say that they're fine. So we don't know what level of credibility to give somebody that's self-reporting like that. But she could conceivably do herself a lot of favors if she performs well. She could also hurt herself very badly if she does not.
All right, legal analyst Jeremy Rosenthal here to help us break down the very latest as it pertains to this Wendy Williams case and in her conservatorship. Jeremy, before I let you go, any final thoughts of things that the audience should be looking out for in these next coming days?
This is a very bizarre thing, throwing a note out the window, wanting to be rescued, and then having this all done very publicly. This is a very bizarre thing. And not only that, when we talk about these types of conservatorships, when we talk about guardianships, again, these are really courts that are helping people, helping families really across this country that are trying to care for elderly people, that are trying to protect them from abuse, from isolation. And just it's important to remember that Wendy Williams is an outlier. It's good that it's shining light on the entirety of the system. That's always a positive. And the fact that her case has gotten so weird and so bizarre in a weird way is sort of a blessing like that. But yeah, we're going to see what happens. I wouldn't expect a lot to change. I really wouldn't, but you never know. Maybe this is a great day for her and a great thing to happen. We'll just have to stay tuned.
All right, Jeremy Rosenthal here to help us break down the very latest. We appreciate you for being with us here on Live Now.
Have a great night.